Welcome to the Determined People podcast. We are dedicated to spreading encouragement, strength, and hope to a world that's in desperate need of it. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you one thing. Please hit the subscribe button. That way you'll get updated every 2 weeks when we put new content out on this YouTube channel. Share it with your family, your friends, your acquaintances. Spreading hope is what we're about. Spreading encouragement is what we're about. I hope that in these stories that you find yourself in those stories, you say, if that person made it, maybe I can too. That's what we're all about. Our world is in desperate need of hope. Where do you go when crisis strikes your life? When your world is rocked. A lot of times people will go to a church, sometimes having not been in a church for years. That tells me two things. Number one, they believe that there is a God. Number two, more importantly, they believe he can do something about their situation. That is called hope. Our guest today is an expert on human suffering because he sees it in his life and his career all day long. The Reverend Dr. Daryl Horton is a native of Austin who announced his calling to the ministry on February 2nd, 1995. He was ordained on March 17th of 2001, been a member of Mount Zion Baptist Church since 2002. He served in many capacities, including being a preacher, a teacher, and a leader of the church and a leader in the community. During that time span, Dr. Horton faithfully served as the youth pastor, which is what he was doing when I met him, and assistant to the pastor. Today, Dr. Horton is the senior pastor of Mount Zion. In today's interview, you're going to hear how he felt the calling, what he did with it, and it was not an easy path to get there, and what his vision is for Mount Zion and the community of Austin. We might even toss a little theology if we have a chance. Welcome, Daryl. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Been trying to get this done for a while now.
For a little bit.
I believe in God's timing. I don't always like it, but I believe in it.
There you go.
He doesn't ask me what my opinion is, though.
Rarely does he.
No. So you grew up in Austin. What were you like as a kid? Were you a troublemaker, a good kid, somewhere in between?
Oh, gosh. I would probably say I was more the kid that blended in on the wall. Just kind of going about my business, not doing too much. Parents kept us in church a lot. And so I joke with some of my friends earlier that my childhood, I was either at school or I was at church or at home. Those were kind of the three places where we were. So didn't really get into too much. Did band, did a little bit of sports, didn't have any talent, so it didn't stick. And so the hype does me no good now since I had no gift to go with it. But yeah, kind of a homebody. And
very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So you mentioned that your parents kept you in church. What was your faith life like? I mean, your real faith life. I mean, showing up to church doesn't mean you have faith, right?
Right.
But what was your faith life like as a youth?
I think for me, John, it was really interesting because I saw faith in both of my parents. My dad, we had a blessed home. We weren't, I guess if I had to look at it now, we were probably something like lower middle class, I guess. My mom didn't work because they decided it was better for her to stay home to take care of the 4 kids. And so it was so great to be able to grow up in a house where mom was always there, a woman of faith. And so we would wake up in the morning with mom and listen to people like Charles Stanley, Chuck Swindoll. And so we'd listen to that on the radio every morning. And so I got accustomed to listening to that. But my own personal faith, I was probably still trying to figure it out because, again, I was in Sunday school, I was at church, I was in training union. We were in all those things. I was a junior usher, sang in the choir. I mean, we did all of that, and we figured that's what we did, and that's how we knew we were saved. That's how we knew we were part of the church. But like everybody else, it's not until you get older and you leave and start making personal decisions, you start trying to figure out, is it really faith or is it just what's in my rote memory? Do I go to church because that's what I'm supposed to do? That's what makes me good. And so I would say my faith was there. I don't know in my childhood if I had any huge faith struggles, but thankfully, I think the practice I was in kept me in a good place until I got older and began to have real conversations within to figure out what is faith about? Do I really trust God and who is God in my life? Yeah.
Sure. So your mom, 4 kids. I bet there were days she wanted to work outside the home.
Probably. Yeah. 3 boys and a girl, so she had her hands full.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. I saw a YouTube interview you did a while back. I think it's 2017, and you said that when you got the acceptance letter to TCU, you were shocked.
Oh gosh, yeah.
As a fellow, I was below average student. You had to be above average to get into TCU. I was shocked I got into my school. But so what was it like when you got to the campus of TCU? Tell us about your college life.
It was very interesting. It was a totally different world for me. So growing up in East Austin, just about everybody in the neighborhood, African American families. The church was predominantly African American. So high school, LBJ High School, even though I was a part of the Science Academy, it was a very black environment. And so I get this letter, conditional admission to TCU. They let me in to see if I could make it. And I actually got it right before the summer started. So I had only a few months to get ready, to get packed, find out who my roommate was. And actually, my older brother took me to school the first day I get there. So he takes me up there, helps me unpack the car, drops me off, says later. And so I had to get there early for band camp. And so there's like nobody on campus. I move into the dorm. Don't know really. I met my roommate once with a phone call, and so I get to campus. So once everything really gets kicking, it was kind of a culture shock because TCU is a predominantly white institution, a lot of people that are very wealthy. And so we're walking around the parking lot looking at all these cars, and we're thinking that these belong to the professors and the deans and the presidents and their fellow students that are coming. That was my graduation gift, or mom and dad let me have the old Mercedes, or, and so there's a couple of us like, yeah, my parents don't even have a Mercedes, that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting, a totally different environment, just to see what it was like and where people come from. But God blessed me to have a roommate that we were able to get along. We joke, we're still friends today, best friends today, and we joke about the fact that we spent probably the first week together in silence. Because his high school in Nebraska, I think he told me there were 3 black people in his whole high school. And my high school was almost, not quite the opposite, and so it took a week for us to fill each other out. And so conversations were very minimal, until finally one night we broke into conversation, learned a lot about each other, and just grew to become really good friends. And so the campus was really cool, a lot of resources, a lot of stuff was available, but as we'll probably talk about later, I wasn't college ready at the time.
I get that. So you took you left after your sophomore year.
Yes.
Most of us, our grades suffered the freshman year. You carried it on as a 2-year affair.
Oh yeah.
So a couple of things happened though. Number one was you met a girl.
Yes.
Tell me about
I
that.
did. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I think it was close to the end of our freshman year, maybe beginning of our sophomore year. Our dorms had a social. And so my roommate and I decided to go to the social. We go over to the girls' dorm, and there are 2 young ladies over there. And I see them talking, and they had the courage to come and talk to us. My roommate makes an exit left. And so it's just me and the 2 of them. And so we kind of hit it off, the 3 of us, and start talking. And they come over to my dorm room because they want to see what our rooms look like. And next thing I know, they're in my closet looking through my clothes. Hey, can I borrow that shirt? Hey, can I use that? And I mean, and so I was like, cool, there's girls in my room. That's fine. And so that's kind of how everything sparked off. And so we would talk a little bit later, and she was like, my roommate helped me talk to you because I'd seen you on campus, thought you were cute. And so we kind of go back and forth. But yeah, I met the young lady who would end up being my wife, and we're still together today, 26 years later, and met her there on campus, and I couldn't have prayed for a better person to meet. And I tell people all the time, that's the only thing I accomplished at TCU was meeting her.
The first time.
The first time.
No, I think it's great. And I through you have met her. She is extremely intelligent.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
You definitely married up though.
Oh, of course. Oh yeah. No problems admitting that at all. Yeah.
So after you left TCU, what happened then? Did you get back into education? What happened then?
Sure, yeah. So because of my roommate, we spent 2 years on campus. Of course, our junior year, everybody's like, we got to move off campus. That's what young people do. We're liberated. Let's go do our thing. So my roommate was like, I'm going to be in a bind. I need a roommate. Is there any way you can stay up here? I know you're on academic suspension, but is there any way you can stay in the area? So I convinced my parents to let me go to Tarrant County Junior College. Yeah. So I go to the junior college, and again, my academic performance was just as bad. And so I end up falling out of there the first semester. But because we had a year lease in the apartment, I stayed. And so I stay in Fort Worth for another year, and then eventually we make the decision I need to come back to Austin. So I come to Austin. My parents wouldn't let me just stay at the house and find myself. So I had to work, and I had to go to school. So I go to ACC for about a year or so, and then I finally get my act together. Shalonda and I end up getting married because she now graduates from TCU, going into the military. So we get married after I convince her parents I'm not a total loser, and they allow me to do that. And so I go to ACC for a little while, and then we get married. Her first duty station is in San Antonio. So we moved to San Antonio while I begin my commute to what was then Southwest Texas State in San Marcos.
San Marcos.
And so I eventually graduate my undergraduate from Southwest Texas, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it took me 7 years to do what most do in 4.
You crammed 4 years into 7.
That's
okay?
right.
I get that.
I enjoyed it too much.
Hey, you got it done. That's all that counts. Not how you start, it's how you finish, right?
Yeah.
So what did you do after college?
So after college, I was working retail. throughout the whole time I was in school. And so the degree from Southwest Texas was, for them, it was their version of an engineering degree because then they didn't have an engineering department. And so I ended up going to the semiconductor industry here in Austin, working at Applied Materials, doing project manager work and what they called configuration engineering work. And again, the same time, I'm still involved in the church because that's what I know how to do. And it's before we get married is when I have that conversation with God that I feel like God is calling me into ministry, whatever that means. And so I feel the call from God. I accept that calling from God. Again, get married, move to San Antonio. We moved once or twice more from there. But I'm just working jobs as an engineer and doing sales in the midst of trying to see what it means to be married.
Was there anything that happened that makes you know that calling came? Or was it just something internal? God was working in you? Or how was it? And did you resist it for a while?
I don't really think I resisted it too much. I can still remember that. So it was during that transition moment when I left Fort Worth, came back home, started going to ACC. Again, I kind of went back in that pattern with my mom because my mom was still at home because I had a younger brother at the house. And so I'd be at home and I would get up with her in the morning. We'd listen to talk radio and listen to church and listen. And I still remember to this day that I believe it was a sermon by Chuck Swindoll was on the radio, and I'm listening to it and just listening and listening. And all of a sudden I hear this voice in my head that says, I want you to do that. And I'm kind of going, do what? Listen to the radio? You want me to be a radio op? What do you want me to do? And it just wouldn't go away. It was this nagging thing like, this is what I'm calling you to do. This is who I'm calling you to be. And so since Mom was always present, I kind of talked to her about that. And I said, Mom, I said, I don't know, but I think I hear God calling me to, to ministry, whatever that means. And she's like, I don't know. I've seen how the world treats preachers. I know how that kind of stuff works. And I don't know if I want that for you, but it's not up to me. It's between you and God. And so, of course, her guidance was keep praying about it and go talk to the pastor. And so the short version is that I finally made an appointment with my pastor that we had at the time. Didn't tell him what it was about, just told him I wanted to meet with him for something. I met him for dinner one night. I walk in the restaurant. He's sitting at the table. And he says, Daryl, I've been waiting for you for a long time. And I was like, I didn't think I was that late. And he says, no, this conversation, I've seen the call on you before you saw it.
Really?
And I can't believe it took us this long to have this conversation. And so his conversation was not convincing me or telling me to walk away from it. He just said, this is kind of what it sounds like. This is what you need to deal with and meditate on. But I can't answer it for you. You have to. And so based on his guidance, I prayed about it some more, whatever it was. And it was a Sunday in December. I went to the front of the church and announced to the church that I believe God is calling me into ministry. And as they say, the rest is history.
Didn't realize what you were getting into. Christianity is
Not
a blood
even
sport.
close.
Yeah. Christianity is a blood sport.
Can be, yeah.
Your life doesn't become easy when you become a Christian. In fact, it gets harder.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and Shalonda was supportive.
Yes, and so she kind of knew what she was getting into because, again, I preached my first sermon, which is kind of what we do in the Black church faith, is that you announce your calling under the leadership of your pastor, and then you have your first public sermon, which is kind of your walking into your introduction into ministry. So the whole church comes together, you invite family, do all that, and they watch you butcher a text because you don't know what you're doing. And so you read the scripture and you make all of these assessments of the text that are probably totally wrong, and so you move from there and do that. And so I did that a year before Shalonda and I got married. So she kind of knew what was going on. We really didn't know what ministry was about, but she knew that this is the direction God was leading. So, yeah.
How did you get to Mount Zion?
Great question. So I was in my home church here in Austin when I came back. When we got married, after she did 4 years of active duty, we came back to Austin because, again, based on my degree, from coming from Texas State, I figured it would be better to stay in the Austin area to get a job. So we came back home. I go back to my home church and I begin to serve there and begin to do some ministry work there. And John, it was weird. The Lord had just begun to speak to me to say, you can't stay here. You have to move on. You can't stay. And I was like, nah, I'm hearing that wrong. This is where I grew up. This is a great place to be, so-and-so, so-and-so. And it wasn't until one day my wife pulled me to the side when we were at home and she says, I know that this is your home, but it's just not working here. I'm not getting fed. I'm not feeling what we're supposed to feel. So that was confirmation we need to look. Because, again, we hadn't been married long, but I did know that if your wife's not happy, your life is not happy. So I did know that. And so that was kind of the trigger for me to start looking and to venture out. And so with my wife not being from Austin, a couple of Sundays we would venture out and I would just show her places I knew. And one of the first places I went because of Dr. Clark and seeing him from a distance my whole life, I said, let's go to Mount Zion. My sister's a member here. Let's go check it out. We go visit one Sunday, and I thought it was just another visit. And little did I know, a week or so later, she says, that's the place where I think we need to be. I didn't tell you the Sunday we were there because it was the first place we went. But that's where I think we should be. So we prayed about it. And after several attempts to get back to church, we finally went back. And of all things to do, we actually joined church on a Monday night during Bible study. Because every Sunday we went to join, something would stop us, something would come up, something would happen. And so that's what we did. So that's how I ended up there, yeah.
And that is Satan getting in your way, too.
Trying to stop us. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, we went around it.
I love in your story how God works.
Yeah.
He's talking to you going, I want you to move. I want you to leave. And you're like, no, I don't want to. You're resisting that.
Yeah.
He goes, okay, I'm bringing in the big guns.
That's right.
Batter up, you know?
That's right, yeah.
I think that's awesome, though. So you've been for over 20 years now. You've been a pastor. How have you grown as a pastor from that first botched sermon you did to today?
Wow, that's a great question. My hope is that I've grown as an orator. I hope that my public presence, I hope my public speaking, I hope my ability to put a sermon together that makes sense, that's coherent, that is able for people to hear and understand. My hope is that has grown over the years. I also hope that my ability to bring in life experience, my ability to relate to people, I hope that has grown over time. But I also hope that there's a sense of wisdom that I've gained in the ability, because here's the weird part. As we get older, we try to fight it. And I used to love it that everywhere I'd go, people go, hey, young man, hey, so-and-so, and hey, doing whatever. Those conversations are starting to be few and far between now. I'm starting to get to places now where I may be the youngest guy in the room, but nobody calls me young man anymore. And so that means that I have to now get to a place where God wants me to start pouring in those who are behind me. And so my hope is that I'm at a place where I'm mature enough and I've learned enough that whatever things I've done, whether it by learning by tripping and falling or learning through success, that I'm willing and able to partner to share that with somebody else.
How do you prepare a sermon?
Oh, gosh. So I've learned that sermon preparation really never stops. And I've learned that from some of the seasoned people that I've hung around. And so Monday through Friday, every day of the week, I'm always listening for sermon content, listening for sermon material, listening for sermon titles, because life presents it. And so I'll never forget, a brief story is that I had an uncle that passed away, and he was dear to me, and the wife called and asked me to do his eulogy, and it was so crazy. He was an amazing golfer, and I would love to get a chance to play golf with him. Well, for his eulogy, I ended up preaching a sermon that was called Life is Better from the Fairway, because I had a golf outing with him one day, and I'm trying to impress him to let him know how far I hit a golf ball. And so it may go 300 yards to another fairway, but I hit it far. And so we were sitting on one hole, I think it was a par 4, hit the ball, went somewhere else, get on the green, make the putt for par. And he says, that was a great save, but life is always better in the fairway. And little did I know that he was going to pass away almost a year later, but it was that moment, because it was in my memory, that's where the eulogy came from. Yeah. And so I've learned that everything I do in life, a visit to the grocery store, a conversation with someone, an interaction with children, there could be a sermon, there could be sermon content there. So you take that along with the study of the Bible and you mix those together, and that's kind of how it comes.
And that's beautiful, because listening
yes.
to conversations, and whether it's a kid or somebody in the grocery store
yeah.
or whatever, you got to get the noise out.
Yes.
That's because God's always talking to us, I
yeah.
believe, but there's so much noise from the world. Yeah. We just got to filter that out and listen to, listening to you, yeah. and to others. I think that's great. So, and you mentioned that. I mean, you go to the grocery store, pastors are always on.
Yeah.
You don't really get time off unless you just hide in your closet or something, right? I mean, you can't do that. You can't shy away from life. Yeah. How do you take care of yourself?
I'm learning. So it's been, matter of fact, this Sunday will be my official year as serving as senior pastor of Mount Zion. And so one of the greatest bits of advice that Dr. Clark gave me as we were making the transition is that he told me, whatever's here at the church office will be waiting for you when you get back. At least one day a week, you need to get away from the church. Don't answer the phone. Go play golf. Go do something, because if not, it's not going to be good for your health. And so that's one thing I try to do. The golf is not happening as much, but I try to make sure that there's at least one day a week that you disconnect, spend time with my wife, spend time with the family, and just make sure, because again, it really is true. Everything appears to be urgent. And again, there are some matters as a pastor that are urgent, when there's a death, when there's whatever, and you make the arrangements you need to make. But every email, every call that people give, they're not urgent. And if you don't take care of you, then I can't be any good for them. So that's what I try to do.
That's exactly right. Take care of yourself. Otherwise, you won't be any good to yourself or your family or your congregation.
Yeah.
Mount Zion dates back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
But you followed a man who was there 51 years. Is that right?
Yes.
What was that like? Those are big shoes to fill. What was that like?
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Clark was a larger-than-life individual. And what was amazing is that he passed away in April. And so when we had his services, I'll never forget his grandson made a statement during his funeral service that I thought was amazing. He said that sometimes you stand so close to the mountain that you forget how majestic it is. And so I think about Dr. Clark and the fact that I had 20 years to literally walk around him, walk behind him, walk beside him, to hear his stories, to watch his thoughts, to see his mannerisms, to see his methods. And so it was amazing just to have a close-up view of how he felt about God and how he loved God, how he served God, how he loved people, how he served preachers, his love for people would often call him a pastor's pastor because people wanted him to be their pastor so they could learn from him and get the love that he had. And so it was an experience that I will never take for granted and know that it had to be God that sent me there for that moment.
That's the ultimate compliment. Pastor's pastor.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to encourage you to listen to what he said about get one day away. Because he lasted 51 years.
Yeah. Lived to be 92, so he knew what he was doing.
We need to listen to the people that are wiser who've gone there before, right?
Yeah.
That is great. Let me draw on some of your experience as a youth pastor.
Sure.
I know a couple of areas. First of all, let's talk about the easy one. That is, I know education is important to you.
Sure.
And Mount Zion has Partners in Education. Would you walk through what Partners in Education is, how you work with the community and the kids?
Sure, yeah. So it predates me, of course, but what Mount Zion does with Partners in Education is that it's a group of volunteers at the church who provide things like tutoring for the students. They help us to partner with college students and with other organizations to bring them in as tutors to provide programs where they also do college tours. So that way we take the children and we can expose them to the different environments, hoping that it'll light a fire in them as early as middle school to say, I do want to go to college. I do want to live and be able to become an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever it is they might want to become that where that level of education is required. And so everything from tutoring to mentorship to college tours to helping people with financial aid, those kind of things. When the ministry was at its prime, those are some of the things that we were focusing on.
You bet. A lot of kids don't realize the resources available for them to go to college.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about this a little bit further. But like foster kids in Texas, college is free.
That's right.
But only 2% take advantage of it.
Yeah.
2%. Now I want to go into a little darker subject, and that is, suicide became the number 2 killer of kids in 2016.
Sure.
And it rages on. It was up 33% during the pandemic. It's horrible to think of a young person who should be full of hope and optimism and can't wait to get out and show the world who they are and what they can do. But drawing upon your experience as a youth pastor, what are some of the struggles that kids are facing nowadays that, like, I thought it was hard when I grew up. I know it's harder today, but what are some of the struggles that kids share with you that they're dealing with?
It's amazing because some of the struggles are similar. I mean, it may be a different format or it may be a different way they do it, but you still hear some of the same things like bullying. For you and I, when we were in elementary school and junior high, the kid had to do it in your face. The kid had to be bigger than you and had to do whatever. Well, these kids now, because of social media, because of text messaging, you can be bullied online. They don't have to be there. They can hide their face. They can do those things. And so I still hear situations like that where some kids make themselves vulnerable. We hear this with young ladies all the time. They get to that unfortunate place where they think a guy is into them and they'll send them a picture that they soon regret. And the guy sends the picture to 1 million people. So now the child can't even go to school and show their face. And so from moments like that, there can be depression, there can be anxiety, and there can be the idea that life will never get worse than this. And so I may want to, take my life. And so there's things like bullying. There are things like loneliness and isolation. People are still growing up in broken homes. And so if mom and dad are not there, or mom or whoever the single parent might be is working 2 jobs, so they're at the house and they're isolated and don't have friends. So I'm still seeing some of those type of things. And then, like I said, just everyday life. Life can be challenging. And if I could help parents a little bit, we have to be careful about how we push our kids to try to help them achieve all that they can. I mean, I've seen children who have busier schedules than I've ever had as an adult because they go to school, they do sports, they do music, they do extracurricular, they do Boy Scouts, they do all these other things, and the child's schedule is running them ragged 6 days a week, and they never get a break. And so sometimes it can be just the anxiety and stress of trying to put all of this stuff together so that you can look like the perfectly rounded student for college. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety that goes with that.
From my observation, when my kids were in school, a lot of times the parents will be trying to live vicariously through that kid. Like what all my kid is doing. Tremendous pressure on a kid. And they don't get time just to hang out and be a kid and do nothing sometimes, just be lazy, which teenagers can be.
Which they do.
Sure, that's okay too. Have you had to visit the home of a family that's lost a child?
Absolutely.
What's that like?
It can be one of the hardest things you've ever done. Unfortunately, I've had to be with the family as they lost their child sitting in the hospital. I've watched the child pass away in the hospital. I've had to visit with a family of a young child that actually took his own life. We're not sure if it was an accident or if it was intentional because he was in the room by himself, unfortunately with a firearm. But we had to walk with a family through that moment. And unfortunately, I've seen about 4 or 5 in the last. It's probably been over 10, 15 years I've seen that. And it's very difficult because you're watching parents and siblings grieve. And the part that I didn't really think about is that when you're talking about children who are in elementary school and middle school, then the entire campus grieves as well. And so it's been very interesting to walk through that moment and to be in such an amazing place where I get the opportunity to help provide comfort in that moment. Because each of these students I'm thinking about, I ended up doing the funeral service. I ended up doing the eulogy, conducting the whole thing. And so those are moments where I have to ask God, I don't need a cute sermon today, but I need a sermon that's going to help heal the family, that's going to help heal the community, that's going to help the teacher, it's going to help the daycare. I mean, and so those are complicated matters, but one thing I can say is that God, in my opinion, has been faithful every time. That even in a funeral service full of children, full of middle schoolers, whatever the case is, God provides a word with kids that don't even come to church, where God can comfort them and it lasts with them. And so they're very challenging as you imagine. Yeah.
I can't imagine what's like I know too many people who have lost children for anything from cancer to suicide to accidental drug overdose, murder.
Oh, yeah.
And the one thing universal is that they miss their child every day.
Absolutely.
They've healed from it. But they still miss that child every single day.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let me ask you, speaking of funerals, what is it like when someone asks you to do a funeral for a family member and you don't really know the family member? What do you do?
That never happens. No, no. Those are. I've come to learn that those are sometimes amazing opportunities. Again, for me as a pastor, that's an amazing opportunity for God to demonstrate His omniscience. It's amazing to me because I've done several funerals of persons that I've never met, either because they were longtime members of Mount Zion and Pastor Clark was not available, and so it was before me and I didn't know them, or just a distant family member didn't belong to the church or whatever. And so what I do, and I don't know that every pastor does this, but what I do, because I believe that's what God leads me to do, is that every eulogy you ever hear me do is custom for that person. I don't have a generic sermon for a funeral. But I pray and spend time asking God that when people leave this funeral, I want them to have the impression that I knew that person very well. And to this point, I think God has been faithful in that. And so it can be very stressful if I don't know anything about the person. So I have to rely on conversations with the family. I have to rely on the obituary. I have to do those kind of things. But in my experience, God has been so faithful that I've had people leave sermons and go, oh my gosh, how many years did you know that person? Because you talked about them as if, and I just tell them, God bless you, thank you. And, and can't get into it. So
I was always curious about that because I've been to funerals and you can tell that the pastor's faking his way through.
Oh,
yeah. And so-and-so I know was a man of God. You didn't even know the guy.
You didn't even say his name. So, So they can be tough, but again, I think God is faithful if we make ourselves available for Him to do that.
And I love your attitude on that. I really do. And you're living proof that He is faithful. He shows up. Even when I doubt, He still shows up.
Oh, yeah.
Now I want to talk about a high point in your life because I think this is so great that you earned a Doctor of Divinity from the school that basically said, don't come back.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
How did that feel when you were pronounced Dr. Daryl Horton?
It was, John, it was amazing because, again, my journey through all the different schools and all the things that I've been through, academics had never been my specialty. I made it through high school. I think I had a C average. Back then, our high school class was about 140 people. I literally believe I was about 120 out of my class.
Yeah.
It was, my only A in high
relate.
school was band, right?
Okay.
That's, And so when I get to TCU, like I told you, I go through, I do a couple of things, but I think part of my failure in college is that I didn't have a plan. So I was taking stuff to figure out what to do. And when you're making D's and F's trying to figure it out, the GPA suffers. So by the time I get done at Southwest Texas and I said, I'm never going to school ever again, a friend of mine approached me and he was going to seminary at Baylor, at Truett. And he says, man, you ought to think about going. And I'm like, based on what undergrad was like, I don't even want to think about graduate school. But it was the best decision I could have ever made because I get to graduate school and I found out that because that was where I'm passionate about the Bible, about God, my grades excelled. And I had GPA I never thought was achievable through all of my graduate school. So I get the acceptance letter from TCU and I'm thinking, this is surreal. God has such a sense of humor that the school I couldn't get an undergraduate degree from, there's an opportunity that if I don't blow it, I could get a doctoral degree from there. And so that was in the back of my mind, that God is faithful, that God has a sense of humor. And so I get to Bright Divinity School. I do my best work that I can. I'm still working full time at the church. I'm doing all that I can. And 4.5 years later, it was one of the best experiences I'd ever had. And when I walked across that stage, my best friends that I met in undergraduate, my wife, and all the friends we have from TCU, I was looking at them and I go, I can finally really be an alum. I don't have to be one by proxy. I don't have to be one from a distance because I hung out here, but I have something on the wall now that's purple and I can really be. And so it meant a lot for God to allow that opportunity to do that.
I think that's awesome. And yes, he has a sense of humor.
Oh, gosh.
Look at me. My life is a walking sitcom. He just sits up there and just laughs. Like, we'll see what we can do with you today, John.
Yeah.
No, I think that's awesome because I love stories like that have come full circle, if you
Yeah.
will, right? And I love the redemption and restoration stories as well.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that you take an annual road trip in the summertime with a rabbi.
Yes.
How did those get started?
So Rabbi and I met each other through Interfaith Action of Central Texas, known as IACT. And so I was approached to become a part of the board. He was already there. And I tell you, this is the true story. I go to my first board meeting, and the only seat left at the table is next to him. So I sit down at the table. I'm like, who is this guy? He's wearing a hat, and he's got the beard, doing the whole...
Is he Hasidic?
No.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at him and trying to figure out what's going on, what's his story, and we hit it off because he's a jokester. So we're sitting at this board meeting, and I'm trying to be professional, got my suit on. This is the first time I've ever served on a board, and he's cracking jokes, and we're doing our thing. And so as we begin to meet and begin to do things together in the city, we found out that we had like passions. We both want to see Austin be successful. We both want to see the city of Austin come together for things that are right, for things that are just. And so as we begin to learn those things, things begin to happen. We begin to see the shootings on television. We begin to see all of these things that are happening. And one day he calls and says, listen, I just found out that there's a new museum that's been created in Montgomery, Alabama that talks about racism, talks about slavery. What do you think if we both took a bus with our congregates on it and we go see this as an act of how can we come together to fight this thing? And I said, great, let's figure it out. Well, that got too expensive, and he came back, and I thought he was going to let it go, and he goes, well, since we can't do the bus, you and I do it. And I was like, okay, we've known each other a few years, but you want the two of us to sit in a car together for 4 days with nobody else. Yeah, let's give it a try. And so, John, it was the most amazing thing we've ever done. We left Austin, drove to Houston, went to the Holocaust Museum. I'd never been in my life. Holocaust Museum, go to New Orleans, go to Selma, go to Montgomery, go to Birmingham, go to Memphis, Tennessee, to go to the Civil Rights Museum, go to Little Rock, Arkansas, and we made that entire road trip in 4 days. Wow. And we learned so much about each other. We learned so much about each other's lives, each other's faith, each other's walk. But we also learned about the similarities of what we feel about what God wants for humanity. And so that was our first trip. And so since it was such a great success, we did a second one. This time we went to New York, went to Boston. We flew, didn't drive. But we experienced all of that because we felt like in this country, the South always gets the raw end of the deal. Slavery, racism, all of that stuff. but a lot of that stuff happened up north as well. So we wanted to go up there and look at the picture of what it looked like up north. And so to go to New York and to see the Statue of Liberty right across the bay, or right across the Hudson River, from a place where more slaves were brought in than anywhere else in the country. And there's
Really? I
no
didn't know that.
recognition. There's no, I think it's called Port 9, or one of those is where it's identified that more slaves came through there with the Statue of Liberty sitting right there on the side. Wow. And so you have his ancestors that came in on a boat looking for freedom, where my ancestors came in under the bottom, shackled in the same place. Yeah. And so we walked through those moments. We walked down to Wall Street and learned the history of Wall Street, that it literally used to be a wall. It was a wall built by slaves to keep the natives out.
Really?
So that the Dutch, I think it was the Dutch people, so they could keep the natives out of the city. And then there was a church built there that were built by slaves that they could not even attend. And so we walked through all of those places. We went to the place where you see the Supreme Court and just the corner of what's supposed to be justice and all of those things. And so we just went and pointed things out. Went to Boston and went to the park and went to see all the places and where freedom began in this country, the place where the first shot was taken, where Crispus Attucks died. We stood on that spot and just talked about the irony and all these things. And so that's what we've been doing. We did it for 2 years. COVID came. And so our next journey was to try to go to the Midwest, because we wanted to tell the stories of Native Americans, because they have shared stories of suffering. And so he did a little bit of that without me, because COVID was still running and it wasn't quite a good idea. But our hope is that things will get into a place where we can do that again, because we want to bring awareness to what's going on, not to just blow the trumpet of tragedy, but to say that we can do it together, to learn and to care about the suffering of other people.
Sure.
And so, so that's kind of what we've been doing,
I think that's great. Great. Hey, I'm 1/8 Cherokee Indian.
Yeah.
My people got screwed, okay? They're the worst deal makers on the planet. So, when they talk about reparations, it's like, well, get in line.
It happened here.
I don't even pretend to get into that conversation. But let me ask you a question about racism and bigotry. I mean, Jews have certainly suffered as well.
Sure.
And Christians suffer as well. Mm-hmm. Today, it's almost perverse to be known as a Christian in some circles.
Sure.
Where do you think we are as a country on racism? I mean, it's always going to be here.
Oh yeah.
But personally, I believe it's waning. Do you share that belief, or what are your thoughts?
I want to be optimistic and say that it is, and here's the reason why. Because I believe that there are generations coming behind me who have grown up in communities that have been so multicultural that they look at the rest of us and go, what's the deal? Mm-hmm. Because his skin or her skin looks different, it's still a person, it's still my best friend. The thing that concerns me, though, is that there are two things. Number one, we don't have the ability or the guts to claim the truth of what has taken place. Mm-hmm. That there have been hundreds of years of misuse and abuse and neglect and counting others as less than. And if we refuse to acknowledge that, then we're just perpetuating what takes place. Mm-hmm. The second part of that is that even though the generation behind me has a different lens, I'm concerned about the older that still pours into them. Because you still have grandparents and great-grandparents who, whether it's intentional or whether it's not, they're still pouring things into them of how they grew up and what it was like and the names they called other people and how they saw them. And so you always have that tension that goes back and forth. And so I really believe that there's a generation who doesn't get it, who thinks that it's silly, it doesn't make any sense. But I think there's so much of the other generation still around that it doesn't go away, because these are the people who are still in leadership. These are the people who are still training the young ones to come. And so it's still very real, unfortunately. And we have to be vocal enough to deal with it and to figure out how can we, I don't know if we can ever erase it as long as human beings are here, but there's got to be a way for us to make it better.
I believe so. And I remain hopeful. And as far as the people that call each other names, I think that's a lack of intelligence.
Sure, absolutely.
You call people names if you no longer have a cogent argument or argumentative standpoint. I mean, there's no reason to argue. But
that's what children do.
Sure. They can be brutal, too. Yeah. Can we talk a little theology?
We can try.
With me, it'll be theology light, but I'm just curious. I asked a few people some questions and said, what would you, if you could ask a pastor anything, what would you ask? And the first question comes from me.
Okay.
What does it mean when someone says they're spiritual but not religious?
Great question. What I take that to understand from my experience is that when people are spiritual, that means to me that they spend time trying to connect with something or someone larger than themselves, where they want to connect with the universe. They believe that there is a spiritual aspect to who we are, that there's more to us than the physical, but they don't ascribe it to one being as the God that we claim that we serve. Is that it could be a number of things, but more so they're connecting with other humans and also with the larger spiritual aspect of the universe.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think some people think it's like you're going to be labeled a kook if you're called religious, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's just religion is just a belief system.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're crazy or you're going to stand on the street corner with a sign saying, repent, the world will end tomorrow. Like that's going to work.
Okay? Yeah, right. Yeah,
I mean, let's use our brains here. Jesus performed 37 documented miracles, and there's thousands and thousands more that are not.
Sure.
Have you ever witnessed an actual miracle?
That's a great question. I do believe that I have experienced people who have been diagnosed with death, that it was imminent, that there's nothing else we can do, that you might as well wrap it up, call the family, call them in and get it done. And some kind of way God miraculously turns it around and the person lives for another 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen a miracle actually in my presence that comes to mind, but definitely that's a big one when it comes to health and things like that. And it depends on the level of miracle people talk about. I've seen miracles where there's a person that is going to end up in life a certain way, and then somehow God impacts their life and it turns out totally different. Yeah. I think you see a lot of those instances, but a lot of the physical things Jesus did, I don't know if I've seen a lot of those type of things, but healing is definitely a big one that I would say I've been exposed to.
Sure. And he healed people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he healed
Absolutely.
People, yes.
Yeah.
But yes. How does prayer work?
Great question. So prayer, we've had these discussions because there are some who will ask the question, does prayer really serve the purpose we think it does? In other words, do prayers really move God? Is a question that a lot of people ask the question about. And so for me, I think prayer does a couple of things. Number one, prayer helps to center us and helps us to focus on God. It helps us to communicate with God, and it helps us to listen back to God as he speaks to us. I think the other thing that prayer does is that as we listen to God, it helps us to hear God's heart, but it also helps us as those who are spiritual. It helps us to be centered. It helps us to feel God's presence. It helps us to have a clarity of mind, a clarity of thought. And I believe that prayer is a moment that helps us to give our body a sense of rest. It gives our mind a sense of a time to not have to think about issues and work and family and the things that stress us. But prayer is a moment where it's you and the Creator, it's you and God. It's a time of isolation, a time of silence. Because I don't think in our culture we spend enough time in that we're afraid of being silent. And so I think prayer helps us to do all of those things.
You're exactly right. How do you quieten your mind?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
I think you just really have to be intentional. Some people, I love music. I was in band. I was a drummer. Some people don't think drummers are musicians. But and so, again, it seems ironic that a drummer thinks about music as being quiet. But sometimes music does it for me. I can sit with headphones on so that everything else is canceled, but I can hear the music, and the music helps my mind just to settle. And even though I'm paying attention to the music, sometimes I will listen to, I used to do this a lot more before I got older, but sometimes I would actually listen to like drum corps and listen to that, because there's something about the rhythm and something about listening to what the snare drums are playing and picking out each individual rhythm of the sticks. And I mean, that's the kind of stuff that helps to quiet my mind personally, sometimes with music, and then other times it can just be silence. I just want to sit in a dark room and just not hear a thing. Sometimes you put on noise canceling headphones with nothing in it, and it just helps to quiet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Yeah.
Because my mind is always
it's
on,
always running.
Always on,
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
on. So let me ask you a different question here.
Okay.
Where did what I call the rules of religion come from? I mean, like with Baptists, no dancing, no drinking. Well, you lost me there, okay? Those things are fun. With the Catholics, and I'm not picking on these religions. I'm saying,
sure.
I think these things keep people away from church. They keep people away from having a relationship with God. The Catholics, if you're divorced, you can no longer go through communion.
Right.
We're isolating a group of people that probably need communion worse than the rest of the population. Where did this all come from?
I think from studies and then just from experience and some personal thoughts, I think where a lot of those things come from, some of them may have good intentions. I think if we look back at the Pharisees in Scripture, those were the guys who walked around with the fancy robes and the tassels and pointed out everybody else's faults. And what they used to do is that they would actually take the Jewish law, and this is what the law says to do. They would take it 3 steps further so that you would never get close to the violation. And so I think that we have sort of carried that tradition where we believe that if you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't go to the club, you don't do whatever, then you'll never get drunk. You'll never have sex out of marriage. You'll never get yourself in trouble. So if we take the line God has here and we move it this far, then it keeps you from offending God. And I think you're absolutely right. In the process of us doing that, we've made people feel that they're not worthy to be a part of the country club because I like to have a drink every now and then. I like to dance. I like to play cards. My first marriage didn't work out. We both realized it was a mistake. We broke it off and we did our thing. But you're telling me that now I can't come to church because of that. And so I think some of that is what we've done. And unfortunately, I'll probably get kicked out of church for this. I think over the history of the church, we've probably made some rules intentionally to keep people out because we don't want them to be a part of what I'm a part of. What does it look like at my church if I have smokers and drinkers as a part of my church? We got to keep them out because it tarnishes the image.
If you have gay people,
it's going to tarnish the image of who we are. And so I think there's a lot of different factors of where those come from. But some may be intentional. Some of them may be side effects of just the way things have been.
I've got to believe that there's a purity to all of it, though. That
Sure.
there are unintentional consequences, but there's also good consequences in mind.
Sure.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I just try to follow what Jesus did. So,
Yeah.
Would Jesus condemn this person? No. And whereas you may have a gay person sitting there, well, God loves him or her as much as he loves
Right.
me, As much as I like to think I'm his favorite.
That's right.
I'm his favorite recreational sport sometimes.
There you go. Yeah.
But I'm not any better than anybody else. And it's taken me time to get to that point, but it's just so true. And it relieves you of judgment. It relieves you of everything bad that separates us as human beings, right?
Yeah. And I believe that the church in general has done a terrible job of loving people. I really do. I mean, all of us, depending on your denomination and all that stuff, we all have our pet peeve sins, and we harp on those so much that love never has a chance. And so, again, you have someone who's been a drug addict for 15 years and you've watched them stumble back and forth up and down the street in front of your church. Instead of pointing at them and not wanting them to come to church because they're dirty or they smell or their past, what would it look like for you to love them enough to bring them in if you truly believe that Jesus has the life-saving power to do it? Instead of pointing them out, why don't you bring them in and give Jesus a try in their life to see if loving them works more than condemning them? And I just think the church has a long way to go to learn how to love people instead of thinking that if I point out their faults, that'll cause them to change.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But Jesus would have done what you described. Bring them in.
Yeah.
Bring them in. Let them know that, you are part of the family.
Yeah, he got a bad rep hanging out with sinners.
Yes, he did. Yes. Yes, they tried to kill him for 3.5 years,
Yeah.
So, let's move forward. So you and Shalonda recently took in 2 foster kids.
Yes.
How's that going?
It has been an experience for sure. It took us about 2 years to go through the process. COVID was part of it. And then also we went through the training and the paperwork takes a long time. And so by the time we turned the paperwork in, they said it was too late. You got to start over. So we took all the training again through COVID. So it was virtual. And so I like to think we have the material down since we've done it twice, but it's been such an experience because again, I think the one thing that she and I say to each other over and over again is that we never give parents enough credit. Because I agree. As a youth pastor, there were people who used to question me to say, how can you be a youth pastor and you don't have any children? And my argument would always be, I don't have to have children to love children. But what I do validate today is that there are definitely things I did not know because I've never had children.
Sure.
I didn't know what it was like to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning because they're screaming for no reason and won't go back to sleep. I don't know there are some things you don't know. I don't know what it's like to get 2 kids dressed in the morning and get to church on time, and then they get in the car, spit up on something, you got to turn around you. I don't know that parents are going through that while I, as the youth pastor, sitting at church going, why can't you get here on time? Why are you late? I've been looking for you. And so those have been some of the greatest things I've learned in this short time is a greater appreciation, not just for my parents, but for the parents of our church.
Yes.
Yeah.
You and Shalonda will be great teachers for those kids because I believe that, see if I can say this where it makes sense. But I believe that every societal issue we have with our kids growing up, it can all be solved in the home.
Sure.
Just be dedicated, devoted parents to not running from things, seeing your kids for who they truly are.
Oh, yeah.
And then correcting.
Yes.
You know, I mean, God doesn't punish, he disciplines. That's what parents should do. So
That's right.
I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited.
Well,
you know,
thank you.
You might want to reconsider that non-drinking clause. You know?
There have been one or two moments, but I'm glad we can keep each other accountable.
There will be others that we're all imperfect. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
What is your vision for Mount Zion going forward?
Great question.
Time to put your stamp on it. What's it going to be?
Yeah. So what I want for Mount Zion is, and I hope this doesn't sound cliche, but part of the vision is for us to carry the legacy of Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark had a love for preachers. He had a love for education, and he had a love to see people do better because they've been introduced to Christ. And so part of what I have as a vision is for Mount Zion to become a place where preachers and pastors can become more experienced. They can have the opportunity to have education so that they can be better prepared when they get the opportunity to get called into a church to lead them. I want Mount Zion to continue to move forward in having ministries that impact the lives of people, like our criminal justice ministry that impact the lives of people who are re-entering society after times of incarceration. Well, we have ministries like most churches where they're feeding those who are experiencing homelessness. We're helping people to find homes. We're helping to love on people in every facet of how they have needs. But I also want to make sure that Mount Zion is a church that continues the legacy and the heritage of African American people. We don't have time in the podcast today, but Austin is a city like many other cities with gentrification, with other things where our culture is being lost. And the Black church is one of the few places where our culture and heritage is being preserved. And so I want Mount Zion to be the church that its 149-year history celebrates about who we are as Black people. I want us to be proud of that. But it doesn't mean that Mount Zion is a church just for Black people. But we're going to be proud of who we are, our culture, our heritage. And I want that to shine as we allow the gospel to shine through us. And so that's kind of a nutshell of what I'd love to see Mount Zion to be after my time is done.
Well, you're uniquely qualified to get it there. So it's going to be fun to watch what God does through you, because that's how he works. I've often said, I probably said this to you in our conversations, that our U.S. government has great resources. They have almost unlimited resources. They're the worst distributor of those resources. They're ineffective and they're just cost too much.
Yeah.
I always say, put those resources in the hands of the faith and the philanthropic communities.
Yes.
They will move heaven and earth, and they won't waste anything.
That's right.
They won't waste anything.
That's
so
right.
Thank you for all you're doing. I appreciate it, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, and glad we could finally make it happen.
Absolutely. It's only been a few months, but that's okay. Again, trust the timing. So thank you, Daryl.
Thank you.
That is our show for today. Now, I encourage you, go check out Mount Zion Baptist Church. Two words of warning, actually. One is, pee before you go in, because it's about a 2.5 hour service, okay? But the second one is this. If you walk out of there after that service and you don't feel moved by the Spirit, check for a pulse, because it is a wonderful celebration. Even the welcoming of new guests is 20 minutes of people emptying the pews, and the choir is up dancing and singing and all. And it's like, Riverbend, we got to step our game up on that one, man. That's like a 1 minute, hi, how are you? Anyway, you won't regret it. We'll put the service times and the address and the phone number up on screen, and I encourage you to go introduce yourself to the Reverend Dr. Daryl Horton. You won't regret that either. And tell me you caught him on the podcast. That helps. Again, thank you for being here. I will be back tomorrow on the audio broadcast with another 1 minute inspirational thought. And until then, everyone, be well.